Hi, my name is Sammy Cape. I am a sophomore here at Longwood. I'm a sociology student, and I'm joined today by Miss Kathleen Roberts, who's Longwood's Title IX coordinator, and Jeff.
Hi, I'm Jeff Case. I am a senior here at Longwood. I'm a criminal justice and sociology major, and also the assistant goalkeeper coach here at Longwood.
We are here today to do a presentation on sexual assault awareness and advocacy. We're here to spread awareness about the issue of sexual assault on college campuses and promote student advocacy to prevent this issue. Throughout this presentation, we will be referencing a study that two Longwood alumni conducted last year, Gretchen Yoder and Kaylee Glonner, with the help of Dr. Dorothy Suskind, all conducted a study called The Voices of Sexual Assault Survivors at Longwood University. And this study focused on the experiences of Longwood students with sexual assault and harassment. They collected personal narratives and survey data from those students, and throughout this presentation we will be referencing that data and using it to support our mission. By the end of this presentation, we hope that you will have a better understanding of the issues of sexual assault and harassment. You'll be more familiar with your rights as students under Title IX, and you'll have learned something new about how to advocate for a safe and healthy community at Longwood. By a show of hands, how many of you have already had an in-depth conversation about the issue of sexual assault or harassment or Title IX this year? So here's some background on how we got from Gretchen and Kaylee's study to this presentation. Last year, as I said, Gretchen and Kaylee conducted their study with Dr. Suskind, and they ended the study with a presentation of their findings for students and staff. They found that Longwood students lack crucial information about the kinds of behavior that falls under sexual assault and harassment, what our rights are under Title IX, and what university procedures are regarding sexual assault. Last spring, I connected with them and we all worked together to develop this presentation to further their mission of education and awareness about this issue. And Jeff is here to help me present. So here's some faces to match the names that we just mentioned. This is Gretchen, that's Kaylee, and that's Dr. Suskind. All of their emails will be linked at the end of this presentation. So if you have any questions about how or why they conducted their study, or if you want to become part of the team and get involved in this study, definitely reach out to Dr. Suskind. We can always use more help. Okay. Additionally, this presentation will be made available on your professor's Canvas page. We are not going to have time today to go through and read every single word on every slide, but we really encourage you to come back and do so. And then, yeah, anytime you have questions, this is a valuable resource for additional information on this topic. So a disclaimer, we understand that while this topic is important to discuss, it's also difficult to hear about. If at any time you feel overwhelmed and need to step out, please do so. We recognize that you all didn't get to volunteer to be here today and talk about this issue, so please do whatever you need to do to take gentle care of yourselves. And then part of this presentation being a resource, at the very end we have 2 slides with a bunch of different links to supportive resources for you. We've got the RAIN hotline and chat room, and then we've got RAIN is the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, and they have a lot of information regarding sexual assault. We have links to online support groups, links to free online counseling, and then links to additional information on how to be supportive if someone comes to you and tells you that they've experienced sexual assault.
So the first part of this presentation will be going over and defining key terms, and then we'll move on to the data from Gretchen and Kaylee's study and use this data to further explore the problems of sexual assault at Longwood and other college campuses, and then discuss on how we can do that. The biggest goal, we want to spread awareness and promote education about the issue of sexual assault. We want to help encourage advocacy for students and make sure that there is a safe and healthy communication and community on campus. We want you all to have the best time here at Longwood. In order to do that, we want to give you the info or the information to assure safety and happiness here at your time. So consent. We're going to start with consent because it is what the issue of sexual harassment hinges on. To understand consent is the foundation of sexual assault prevention efforts, and we want to make sure that we are making everyday efforts to protect or to practice consent because that's the most powerful thing you can do to protect ourselves and the others around us. It is also the foundation of all healthy relationships between friends, bosses, employees, students, and teachers. To define consent is the voluntary, enthusiastic, and clear agreement between individuals to engage in any specific activity. Note here, we are talking about sexual consent, but consent is a factor of all human relations. It should be cared for in all human interactions and not just sexual ones.
Okay, so now that we know what consent is, how do we practice it? Has anyone ever seen a reference to the 4 pillars of consent before? We hadn't either, but we included it as a helpful way to remember what needs to be in place in order for there to be informed consent between 2 parties. So the first pillar, I'm just going to go through them. The first pillar is capacity. That's how much ability you have to describe exactly how you're feeling and what you're thinking in the moment and to make decisions that are best for you. It's also your ability to actively listen to others' thoughts and feelings. A lowered capacity means that the risk of a consent violation in an activity increases. A good way to keep track of some common capacity lowers is with the mnemonic HALTs. So if you are hungry, angry, lonely, tired, sick, or stressed out, all of those things are gonna lower your capacity. They're gonna take your mind elsewhere. You're gonna be distracted, and they will prevent you from being fully present and fully able to dictate exactly how you're thinking and what you're feeling. So not listed here. Can anyone tell me what the biggest capacity lower is? It is alcohol. If you are unable to remember or think about what's happening or going on, if you're teetering on the edge of consciousness, the risk of a consent violation is essentially guaranteed, especially with activities like driving and sex. It is our responsibility as a community to help protect incapacitated people. College students like to party, and we have to protect each other. And as bystanders, we can do that. So, oh my God, okay. Second pillar is information. Information is all about informed consent. Informed consent is about knowing and understanding exactly what you're being asked to consent to. In order for there to be informed consent, there can't be any assumptions about what is considered acceptable or unacceptable behavior between you and your partner. And there can't be any assumptions about the language that's used to communicate about that behavior. So for example, if your partner says that you guys are gonna hang out, do you both have the same definition of hanging out? Do you both have the same plan or purpose when you say that you're gonna hang out? Yeah, are you on the same page? A good way to check that, a good way to check how informed you are is through the 5 W's. So who, what, when, where, why, and how. Asking questions that start with those words to your partner is a really good way to keep track of whether you all are on the same page and have the same understanding of what's going on. The third pillar is agreement and boundary setting. Agreement and boundary setting is all about the communication that you establish between you and your partner establishes with you. It's super important to feel comfortable asking questions about what you and your partner are doing because you do not have to consent to something that you don't understand. Verbal communication is always the clearest, most effective way to communicate with a partner. Body language can be helpful, can be a helpful indicator of how someone's feeling, but what someone's body is doing is not always reflective of how they're feeling. So it's always important to ask and not assume. Making and honoring agreements with your partner is also super important. So for example, if you all agree to use contraception beforehand and then one person changes their mind at the last minute, that sex is no longer consensual because the the terms of the agreement have changed. An example of a time limit that you could set with your partner, example of a boundary that you can set with your partner is a time limit. So you might be willing and interested in doing or trying something with your partner, but only for a set amount of time. And then you've got to, like, again, it's super important to honor these boundaries and agreements. So after that time limit has passed, if that's the boundary you decide that you're going to set, check in with your partner, talk to them, communicate with them about how you're feeling. There should never be any mystery involved when you are intimate with somebody. Yeah, and then again, just asking lots of questions gives your mind and body and your partner's mind and body time to catch up to each other, which also increases your ability to give and receive informed consent. The last pillar is autonomy. Autonomy is why we practice consent to begin with. So essentially, let people make their own decisions and respect the decisions that they make. Remember that respecting someone's no is the easiest way to honor autonomy, and also that the absence of a no is not necessarily a yes. Remember, direct verbal communication. Also, it's important to note that we all violate consent at some point in our lives. The best thing to do when this happens is to own up and admit that we've made a mistake, try and take as many steps as we can to apologize, and then move on. Normalizing apologies, normalizing accepting the fact that we all mess up will make conversations about consent easier, and it will increase the practice of consent. Okay. So now that we know what consent is, here's what it's not. According to RAINN, again, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, the term sexual assault refers to sexual contact or behavior that occurs without explicit consent of the victim. We've listed some forms of sexual assault here. I want to take a moment to talk about this word force, forcing a victim to perform sexual acts. It's important to know that force is not always physical. Force includes emotional coercion, psychological force such as manipulation or use of threats. Those are all non-physical forms of force that can be involved in sexual assault. And they're still forceful, even though they're not physical. Okay, so that was sexual assault. Sexual harassment, according to RAINN, is unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature in the workplace or learning environment. So again, we've listed some forms of sexual harassment below. Sexual harassment is a broader term than sexual assault. There are three main categories of behavior that fall under sexual harassment. The first is sexual coercion, the second is unwanted sexual attention, and the third is gender harassment. Does anyone know what gender harassment is? So gender harassment is when one person attacks another person on the basis of their gender, attacks or insults them. It can take the form of sexist comments, sexist behavior, jokes that make someone uncomfortable about human bodies or just sex in general. All of those things can fall under gender harassment. And it's important to know also that gender harassment doesn't have to involve sexual interest. It can just be strictly about gender, and it's still considered sexual harassment. Some quick important notes about the other forms of sexual harassment that we have listed here. When we say conditions of employment or advancement that are dependent on sexual favors, when this happens, it often reflects a power imbalance in a relationship between two people. And these conditions can be explicitly set or implicitly set. Additionally, verbal harassment, jumping down a little ways, includes jokes. So jokes about sexual orientation, jokes about sexual favors. Again, if they're making someone uncomfortable, it's considered sexual harassment. And then also discussion of sex or sexual behavior in inappropriate places, such as in class, on public transportation. Again, you really have to read the room and gauge how the other person is feeling.
Okay, now we're going to focus on the issues of sexual harassment here on college campuses. We have some statistics from RAIN, and then among 26.4% of females and 6.8% of males experience sexual assault or rape through physical force, violence, or through use of substances. 23.1% of transgender, genderqueer, or non-conforming students in college have been sexually assaulted. And then again, women are 2 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than robbed. Keep in mind, when you look up these statistics on government websites, these are statistics that are sent or shared through other local police departments all over the nation. So sites like these could be the Uniform Crime Report or the United Nations of Drug and Crime. However, when we have studies like Dr. Susskind, Kaylee, and Gretchen's, this gives us a chance to see the cases of sexual assault that have not been recorded through national data. Some more statistics here from RAIN on sexual assault on college campuses. Only 20% of female students, female student survivors, ages 18 to 24 report to law enforcement. More than 50% of college sexual assaults happen within August, September, October, and November. Keep in mind that those are the times that we are at right now as well. These 4 months can be called as the red zone. These are the peak months of sexual assault happening on college campuses. Part of the problem is now survivors are now disconnected from their families, and they might not know who to report to. We usually look at them to rely on them to be our opening source to communicate problems that we might have. Here you can see a visual of 2023 when sexual assault took place here at Longwood, and you can see the red zone. You can see the peak in those 4 months. Can any of you guys tell me a possible reason or events as to why you might see this spike? A couple of reasons could be in August, we're coming back from summer or from any break, and there's an increase of interaction after these breaks. We see new friends or we see new people in general. We want to get to know each other, and sometimes unfortunate things happen. And then time away from family could be another one. And then again, in August, coming back from the summer, there could be more or an increase of parties, kickback parties. September, we have Labor Day weekend, 3-day weekend, which usually is a big time for college students to hold parties or any special event. Oktoberfest is a big one as well. That is a huge weekend for students here and student life on campus, filled with concerts or outdoor activities for the entire day. And then November is, what's it called? Fall break. And then again in March, Symposium Day. Now, not all these events can happen at parties. Sometimes they can happen on college campus, say the library or D Hall. There can just be through normal interactions day to day.
So here's some data from Gretchen and Kaylee's study on the academic year when sexual assault took place. As you can see, sexual assault is most likely to happen to freshmen. We are not presenting this information to you all to scare you. We are presenting it to you to prepare you. We really want you guys to be informed on the data behind this issue. We believe that knowledge is power, and we want you guys to have the power to be prepared. So I just wanted to emphasize that. Here is a visual of the self-identified gender of the participants in Gretchen and Kaylee's study from last year. As you can see, sexual assault is an issue that impacts absolutely everyone. We know that women and people who are raised as women are more likely to be targeted for sexual assault, but that does not exclude men, non-binary people, gender fluid people, transgender people from experiencing sexual assault, as the data shows. Additionally, there are other factors beyond gender that contribute to an increased risk of sexual assault. And unfortunately, one of those is just being a college student in general. According to RAIN, males age 18 to 24 who are college students are 5 times more likely to experience rape or sexual assault than non-students of the same age. So if this is true, if men experience sexual assault, if non-binary people experience sexual assault, why might someone who is not female, who doesn't identify as female, face additional barriers to seeking support or reporting an instance of sexual assault? So sexual violence overall is treated as a female issue by our society, which creates a stigma for people who are not female or don't identify as female to report or seek help. In reality, as we've iterated, anyone can experience sexual assault, and therefore all survivors, no matter what gender identity they identify as, are entitled to seek legal and emotional support. Here is a breakdown of Gretchen and Kaylee's participants based on their self-identified race. The most important thing to take away from this slide, again, is that sexual assault impacts absolutely everyone. We recognize that overall the student population at Longwood is more homogenous than that of other Virginia schools and of the nation as a whole. So white students are overrepresented in this data, but sexual assault, again, impacts everyone regardless of gender or race. Here is data from Gretchen and Kaylee on where sexual assault happened to Longwood survivors. As you can see, a majority of sexual assaults happened off campus, and the location of the assault is important because the location influences how the case is handled. Should a student choose to report. If the assault happens off campus, unfortunately the power of the Longwood University Police Department declines because that assault is in the jurisdiction of the Prince Edward County Police Department. This means that if a student decides to report an off-campus sexual assault, there is not an option to pursue a non-criminal route for that report, which would be through Title IX, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. Just some important things to know. This data does match national trends. So overwhelmingly, Longwood survivors did know their attacker. And national data also shows that people are much more likely to experience sexual violence from someone that they're familiar with as opposed to a stranger. And here's a visual of Gretchen and Kaylee's participants' relationships to their assaulters. So there were classmates, boyfriends, people who lived in their dorm, friends, and friends of friends, all people who had some form of proximity to the survivor. So what do you guys know about what you all can do to help protect yourselves and your community from sexual assault and harassment? The biggest thing that we can all do is agree to look out for one another. This applies to spaces on campus, but also to any off-campus space, including parties where students are present. In the next few slides, we're going to discuss how we can all do a good job of taking care of one another and taking care of our community here at Longwood.
Additionally, we all have heard the saying, see something, say something. We include it here because it's extremely effective as a bystander to take control of any dangerous situation. Being said, can you tell me a couple potential barriers as to why someone might not say something?
And then they would list, hopefully, some potential barriers.
Yeah. And some could say, afraid to intervene, or they don't know that person, so they also don't recognize the situation as well. That could be a couple factors.
After we list the barriers, I will say all these are examples of barriers to action. Keep in mind that that's what that term means because we're going to repeat it later in the presentation.
So here I go through a couple examples of what we can do for each other. Starting with the first, make sure everyone knows everybody who's present. Now this could be, say, for a dinner or a pregame or just hanging out with a group of people. You don't want to invite one person that might make another one uncomfortable. It's a very uneasy situation that person can be in, or even yourself could be in. An easy example is you don't really want to go party with your ex in close quarters. No one really wants to do that. And then the next three, a buddy system, leaving with the same people you arrive with, and then if you get separated with a friend, have a backup plan. These three can be kind of put together, especially the first two, buddy system, and leave with the same people you arrive with. Make sure that you have those people that you trust, and you know that you can hold them accountable as much as they can hold you accountable as well. And then if you get separated, make sure if it's off campus or on campus, you have someone that's either home or you know where someone is at and they're free, willing. If you give them a phone call, they're going to be there if you need it. For the third or for the fifth one, if you see a student alone or inebriated, stop them and step up and try to help. Kind of how we talked about earlier, a couple barriers. But if we can do this and we see someone that's obviously in trouble, see if you can either find a group of people that you trust that can help you take care of them, or you can have, again, people that you trust come help you with that person, either take them back to the dorm if they know where they live, so you have witnesses so you make sure that they get back safe. And then our sixth one, charge your phone. We've all been guilty of this. This could be caught up in the day, you go out, you go hang out with some people, or you're texting everybody like, hey, like, what's the next spot? What's the situation? And we get so late in the night, or just late in the event that our phone dies. We've all done this, and it's important to have that source of communication in case we really, really need it. And then again, the next three on the right side can be kind of put together. Don't leave your drink unattended. Don't accept drinks from people that you don't know or don't trust, and because you're never sure of the contents that are in mixed drinks. And, reason being, with unattended drinks, you don't know who might take it, who might drink out of it, what might be put in it. You also don't know if that's your drink by the end of the night, especially if they give out cups that are unlabeled, or just, again, red Solo cups, for example. You don't know what's in it. You might catch something unexpectedly if someone took a sip out of it, and then accepting drinks from other people that you don't know or don't trust. And at the very least, if you do, at least see them drink from that, or drink the same drink of where they got it from, so you know that there's nothing in it, and watch them pour it for you and give it to you. Mm-hmm. And then, because you're never sure of the contents of the drink, we've all heard the term of jungle juice. Though you might not hear it here, but you know the example. Reason being, date rape or drugs. A lot of survivors have said by the time they feel something, they've already blacked out, and it can be too late. Try to trust what your body is telling you at any given moment in case you need that help.
And if you feel odd, like the moment you start to feel odd, take it very seriously.
Exactly. And finally, bring water. Now, this might not only be for yourself, but like we talked about in the example in the past or earlier, inebriated person. This could help the people that are around you as well. Someone might be having too much to drink, or even yourself. You might need to slow down and rehydrate yourself so you can make sure that you feel better. That water can be a great tool for anyone around. And another example I skipped over was aware of your surroundings. Now, this could be even on campus or mainly off campus. Make sure that you know your surroundings, or at least your way to get back. Now, for example, Hampton, Sydney. We might think that it's not too far. It's only 3 miles, but most likely you're not the one driving there, especially if you're having contents of alcohol. It's a 10-minute drive, let alone. Make sure that you know how to get back, or you know the place that you're at on campus. It's more spread out than Longwood. So if you need to give someone a call and you know where you're at, you can give them that information if needed.
Okay, so another huge thing that we can all do to protect ourselves and the people around us is to establish boundaries with the people that we share spaces with, particularly living spaces. As Jeff mentioned before, there's so many different kinds of relationships that exist in college, between peers, our relationships with our parents, our relationships with our roommates, our relationships with significant others. And consent is so important in all of these relationships. It's going to take different forms in every relationship, but it needs to exist in all of them. Other than in romantic relationships, I feel like consent comes up the most often in relationships that you're with, in your relationships with people that you live in close quarters with. For example, how many of you have a roommate that's done something that upset you and did this thing without communicating with you beforehand, just by a show of hands? How many of you, or what are some examples of boundaries that either you have set with the people that you live with, or some common examples of boundaries that people set with their roommates, and can anybody tell me why they think those boundaries are important? So again, all of this ties back to informed consent. Make sure that everybody knows that if you all sit down and agree on a rule, that rule applies to everyone. No one is above that rule. This is especially true for romantic partners and people that are coming into your space. Make sure that you realize that if your roommate, just because your roommate is comfortable with somebody does not mean that you have to be comfortable with that person, and vice versa. You've got to also keep track of the people that you're bringing into your roommate's space. If your roommate brings someone into your space that makes you uncomfortable, this is an issue that needs to be addressed immediately. It's an issue that you should bring up as soon as you possibly can. And your roommate should never bring that person around again. And if they do, if this is a continued problem, then you need to go get help. And one of the best resources that we have on campus for this is Resident and Commuter Life. They will help you. I was skeptical in my first semester that it was actually going to work, but they're great people and they will definitely help you get out of an uncomfortable or dangerous situation. One last note on this topic of boundaries with people you live with. This is something that college students just forget to do a lot, and it's really important. Lock your door. That's a really cool thing that we can all do. God forbid you should be in a situation where you feel like you have to lock your door to keep yourself safe. Again, if that ever happens, go straight to RCL. But that is a resource that's available to all of us, and it's a really good way to protect your privacy. Additionally, it is as important to recognize and honor the boundaries that you set with others as it is to recognize the boundaries that you set within yourself. And really notice, be very conscious if someone is pushing those boundaries. If you are romantically involved with someone and you feel as though they are pushing your boundaries, you may be experiencing sexual coercion, which is when someone pressures another person in a non-physical way to have sex or behave in a sexual manner with them. Again, obviously, when we're talking about sexual coercion, these boundaries are different than the boundaries that you have with your roommate, but it is just as okay and important to insist that a romantic partner follows your boundaries as it is to insist that your irritating roommate follows the boundaries you set with them. Sexual coercion can occur in any kind of relationship, and it can include any kind of sexual behavior, including online behavior. Sex and sexual behavior can be coercive even if someone says yes. In the case of harassment, if someone persistently asks another person for sex when they have expressed disinterest, and they just keep asking until that person finally says yes, even though they've received verbal confirmation, that is not consent. It's also important to know that sexual coercion comes in many different forms, and some types of coercion are not obviously intimidating. Remember that any attempt to change previously established parameters of consent, any attempt to change agreements without communication in a way that feels forceful is coercive. And a good way to kind of measure coercion is to think about intent versus impact. So someone can have good intentions, but if the impacts of their sexual behavior on you or with you are negative, then you could be experiencing coercion. Some other forms of coercion can include guilt for refusing to engage in sex, playing on a partner's insecurities in the moment, again, power imbalances, both parties in a relationship should feel totally, completely comfortable saying no to each other at any point in any situation. And if that isn't true, that's a problem. And there's probably some form of power imbalance there. A really common example is with age. Another common example is with social groups. So if your partner is a part of your social group or has an influence on the way that your friends interact with you, that could be a form of power imbalance, and they could hold that over you, sometimes without you even realizing it. So just important to be super vigilant. And then lastly, substances can have the effect of making someone more compliant to sexual behavior. But again, compliance is not consent. So use of substances to try and persuade someone to have sex or engage in sexual behavior is coercive.
Okay, disclaimer. I'll give a disclaimer about this slide, about how this might be some sensitive material, and if you feel any way uncomfortable or any way uneasy, I would recommend and hope that you would either leave or take your time and just step away if needed. Many students that participated in Gretchen, Kaylee, and Dr. Suskin's study reported that they did not identify their experience as sexual assault until some time has passed. This is important to be familiar with the symptoms of trauma response and to practice trusting your intuition. I want to start off by saying that not everybody will have the same response to traumatic events, such as sexual assault. They might not respond the way that you think that they should. I want to say that to get away from the stigma that all survivors will respond as victims. We'll go over 4 phases that survivors may fall into or go through when dealing with sexual assault. The first one being shock. It just happened, or did that just happen? It's not much of a response, but it can be phrased as a frozen fright response. You don't know really know how to react in the moment, and you tend to just carry on. Denial. You then realize what happened, but you don't accept it. You could reassure yourself and say that person wouldn't do that to me. They could be your boyfriend or best friend or a friend of a friend or so forth. Survivors that might see their abuser every day and that abuser acts like nothing happened can be very confusing to the survivor, let alone to outside observers. And that might cause some more damage to that survivor, and they might relive that trauma. Traumatic depression, the realization that whatever happened just hit. You're filling up with a sense of sadness, depressing thoughts, sense of hopelessness, or even despair. Recrimination. This can go one or two ways. First can be positive and reaffirming, and increase of self-worth. You're more than what just happened. Or it can be more negative. The survivor can have an increased feeling of shame or isolation and want to hide away from people, maybe even self-blame. And there could be 2 ways of looking for help as well. Resolution, seeking help, or reporting, trying to find a solution for what happened, or justice for the abuser. However, it's a serious problem when people that are meant to help, let's say school police or mandatory reporters, are untrained to understand trauma response, and it can be different for each person. A lack of understanding can cause more fear or even more harm reported. That's the reason of the presentation. We want to help and try to improve communication between students, staff, Title IX, CAPS, and even the LUPD. Our last form of moving forward or looking for help is integration. This is our moving forward step from all this. We've acknowledged what happened, and we're trying to move past this. It's very important to know that we are more than what just happened, and we're stronger than the trauma that we might have faced.
Okay, so again, what do you guys know about what Longwood's responsibilities are to students who have experienced sexual assault or sexual harassment? Does anyone know any of our rights as students under Title IX? Okay, and then now Kathleen will present the next couple slides. So going over rights under Title IX, going over page 56 of the Longwood Student Handbook in regards to alcohol.
And the amnesty policy.
And the amnesty policy, sorry.
Not easy.
And then here's the visual again. Okay. Okay, so here is data from Gretchen and Kaylee's study on how Longwood survivors chose to proceed with the reporting or with their decision to report or not report. As you can see, a majority of survivors did not choose to report, and this again matches national data trends. The national rate of reporting for sexual assault or sexual harassment is only 25%. There are a lot of incredibly valid reasons why someone might choose not to report, which we'll go into later. And we've already covered a little bit. I think we can all agree that the thought of getting into a cop car in the middle of the day and driving 40 minutes unexpectedly could be re-traumatizing. And while having accurate data on sexual assault is a positive thing for the Longwood community because it helps us better understand this issue, there is absolutely no value judgment on whether a survivor chooses to report or not. Again, it's a highly personal choice, and taking care of your own health and well-being and encouraging the survivor to take care of their own health and well-being is always the most important thing. Yeah.
So again, looking at the previous slide, we saw some stats between reporting and unreporting within college settings. Why is this? Why do we see such a gap in between the two percentages? And even seeing in, let's say, published statistics, like we talked about in the government websites, or compared to private studies such as this. I allow them to say a couple examples. Some that I have are, you might know that person, could be afraid of the consequences for that person, or even for ourselves, what might happen. And you might not know the amnesty policy. So you don't know, since I was under an influence and that person as well, am I going to be charged for what I was under? What will my peers think? For example, with me being on a soccer team and other sports teams as well, what will my teammates think? Will they believe me? Will they trust me or help me through this process? And that could go even for frats, sororities. You might lose whatever community or community club that you were in. And then afraid of re-victimizing, so you try to move forward on your own. You don't want to, you might, for example, criminal justice, we know the process and we know some of the re-victimization that comes in when reporting to police. And you might not want to go through that yourself.
So that being said, all of that being said, now we're going to move on to support and resources.
So when someone comes to you about a sexual assault allegation and are a survivor or even a witness, it is important to stay calm and understanding. Show them that you care and that you are going to be there for them. Don't blame them, don't wave them off, and don't say, hey, I told you you shouldn't have gone to this place, or I thought it was a bad idea. If a survivor seeks medical attention or plans to report, offer to be there for them. Your presence can offer so much support and trust and confidence in the way that they're going to handle the situation. And share a resource like this presentation. Give them space and listen to them on how maybe you can help. You may be supportive in your eyes, but to another person that might be different, or might not be supportive at all. Let them lead their own recovery. So don't push them to report and tell them, I think you should do this. Allow them to do their own process and follow their lead on their feelings.
Additionally, it's really important to be patient. If someone has experienced sexual assault or harassment, there's no timeline for recovering from trauma. Again, let the survivor drive the boat and make their own decisions. Don't pressure them to take steps they're not ready to take yet. And then if at any point you suspect or believe that someone may be considering suicide or self-harm, always call 911. And then there's also the national hotline, National Suicide Prevention Lifeline that we have listed here, and a Lifeline crisis chat that's linked. Again, leave why questions to the investigators, to the school, to the police, should the survivor choose to go that route. Your main job is to act as a supportive friend. And then listed at the bottom are just some kind and supportive ways to respond immediately. If someone comes up to you and opens up to you about an experience of sexual violence, a lot of times when we're told that kind of information, we don't know how to respond immediately. So yeah, definitely come back and read through those just so that you're familiar with them. And then here are the 2 slides that we have with resources. Again, come back to them as